Thank you for coming down. I just have a few questions to ask you. Well, Carrie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm glad we could make this work and finally just sit down and have a conversation. I think we have a lot of things in common as far as the people we're trying to help out.
Yeah, I think so too. So I'm glad that you're taking the time and you invited me, and we're going to see what it's all about.
That's awesome. Well, let me start with my famous little get to know you questions I like to ask everybody. Coffee or tea?
Does anybody ever say tea?
So it's funny, right before we started this, I was talking about one of my earlier interviews I had today. And the
Right.
answer now is yes. In fact, the individual that I interviewed, who will be releasing in about 3 weeks, stated he's never drank coffee. He only drinks tea.
Oh, what an interesting individual.
Yes. So I found the one.
Coffee. Yeah.
Yes. You and me both. I love coffee, as my listeners know, but I always like to ask the question. Every once in a while, I'll get the one out of left field where someone will say lemonade or just something completely that's neither coffee.
It's not an option. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the outside the box thinker. That's the creative in the group that you want.
That's right. Every group needs one.
That's right. What's your favorite place to have that drink of coffee?
My phase in life right now means I have 3 young kids. So if it hasn't been microwaved like 19 times, I'm good.
Yes.
I'll drink it anywhere, especially since all 3 of my blessings have been home with me for 5 months or whatever.
Yes. So I'm assuming they're all school age. So COVID-19 affecting them.
Well, now they're back in school. My oldest is a first grader.
Wow.
So I've got little ones. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I have low coffee standards. If it's hot and it's caffeinated, I'll drink it anywhere.
Yes. And like we were talking about with what we're doing and with families and everything else, that coffee is sometimes what keeps us running.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a best or worst travel story?
Oh, all my travel is good. I mean, not to say I haven't had hiccups in the airport, like the time they thought my husband was a terrorist. That was, interesting. He's not. He's just a Marine. So.
Yeah. Well.
But I mean, dangerous nonetheless, I guess.
This is true.
So other than that, I've been some really amazing places. I did get to go to Bora Bora a couple years ago. Yeah, probably the farthest I've been, and it's like a heaven on earth kind of place.
I'm sure.
So that's the number one.
That's awesome. That sounds very cool. Do you have a favorite or most meaningful nonfiction book?
So I only read nonfiction.
Really? Always?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Pretty much. I'm a nerd. I study a lot. I'm still in school again. I mean, it's just what I do.
Yeah.
And I say my free time, we'll just say it's part of my job, right? But the most pivotal was probably Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
Yes, great book.
Yeah, so not one of those big, like passionate, personal development, eureka kind of things.
Right.
But it was my first book I read when I took that leap into the entrepreneurial side.
Okay.
That was like the first fire, and started my first business, and just kind of been running with it ever since.
And it's funny you say that, and we're going to get more into this as we go forward, but I know you do a lot with what you call mindset. And if I was going to take Rich Dad, Poor Dad and put it into a box of what I think that book is about, because I was just interviewing a guy the other day that does a lot with books, and we were talking about different ones, and I mentioned Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he said, no, I've read a couple other ones, but I've never read that one. And I said, what I like about Rich Dad, Poor Dad is, for me, I think it's more about mindset. Like, it's how you think about it. Not really a financial book as a lot of people probably think it is.
Right. And then probably because of his additional books, when you get into cash flow quadrant and the real estate stuff, I mean, yeah, then it's financial strategies and wealth building and all of that. But you're right. That first one, it is your abundance mindset and financial intelligence. And, I have coaching clients reading it right now. They're not entrepreneurs.
Right.
But they're still reading it because they say, well, I don't have control over my finances, or, I don't get paid enough. I said, well, then we have a mindset issue. I guess we'll read a book and then we'll train to it.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great choice too. Well, we'll let that kind of segue into, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your work experience and so forth.
Yeah. So job number one, career number one was local law enforcement. So I was hired straight out of college. Did I say just a minute there? Did just 7 years in law enforcement. I was with a large city agency, and I got to do, a lot of things in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
As far as, different types of patrol and uniform narcotics and training and a lot of CIT negotiation stuff. I kind of got to run the gamut with it in a quick minute. When I left law enforcement just a couple of years ago, that's when I started building businesses. My husband's a recently retired Marine, so it was kind of our retirement plan, was so we could live wherever we wanted and kind of live life on our terms. At that point we had started a family, so we still have a young family, and that's kind of how it all started. And then I circled back. We'll talk about it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But to where my heart is, it really sits with law enforcement. So now most of my businesses are training law enforcement, back to the people that really have my heart, and where I really want to help and make a difference there. But serial entrepreneur, out of the uniform, but I at least walked the walk and I kind of know what it's about.
Yeah, that's great. So any favorite positions while in, because 7 years is a decent, honestly, I'm at 8.5. So that's a decent amount of time. You are right to do a lot of things depending on the agency. That's rare because usually you're on patrol for 4 or 5 years. And then, but any favorite positions? I know you mentioned vice and narcotics, and I know you mentioned CIT, but any specific ones that really stand out to you?
The most fun was bike patrol.
Really?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Oh, yeah. We had so much fun. Now, I worked in Virginia Beach, so, about 900 officers. Residents is about 500,000, but in the summer, you get over 4 million.
Wow.
So, lots of crowd management, lots of everything. Pros and cons to that. All the good and bad that comes with, a couple million extra people.
I'm in Florida, so I'm familiar with snowbirds, except here they come in the winter.
Exactly, right. There are 6 military bases there, so we have all of that flux as well. Bike patrol was a ton of fun, right? Because it's very busy, it's very fast. You do a lot more narcotics, because obviously you don't have the rolling billboard kind of thing. There's no traffic.
Right.
You really, you get to do a lot and really kind of your own thing. We're like a separate little squad with our own channel doing whatever we wanted, which was really cool. Other than that, the most challenging was CIT.
Yeah.
Definitely CIT. And I was pegged as soon as I was in the academy, and they knew my bachelor's was in psychology.
Okay.
I mean, right away, they're like, we have a psych degree in here, not a criminal justice or kinesiology. You'll be going CIT.
Now, was that a specific unit for you guys, or was CIT just something you did as well on patrol?
Something you did as well. There were probably, and I'm ballparking numbers, there were probably about 300 of us who did get CIT certified. But with all the military bases, very prevalent. Yeah. We had the SEAL teams there, so they would come back and have their issues that then we had to go help with and handle. And then my zone had the psych hospital. Oh. So I did a lot, yeah. Lucky. So I did a lot of the frequent flyer kind of stuff.
Yes, very familiar.
Yeah.
Well, that's and same for us. We are, like, I'm CIT certified, and that is pretty much something you do as well with patrol here. Now we've recently started behavioral health teams. So we have their own units that go out and specifically deal with high volume service users, frequent flyers, as you put it.
Yeah, so, you were more PC than I was. That was nice of you.
But frequent flyers is absolutely correct. And it's good because you can develop that relationship with them, and it actually allows kind of for
Hmm.
something, because these are certified law enforcement. They're not necessarily, not that there's anything wrong with it, but they're not only psych majors and not only doctors. They're
Right. It's
also
not just the
certified law
mental
enforcement.
health. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that marriage of the two, which personally I think is good. I don't, you actually be the
Hmm.
expert in this area.
I would say so. Well, because you still have that very necessary safety law enforcement side,
Yeah.
right? I mean, this is just my experience, but I know that it's similar. Some of the most dangerous situations I was in were with someone who was mentally unstable,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Or at least under some immense influence of some sort of substance,
right. Yeah.
right?
Substance
It
or,
wasn't the sober, mentally sound person that was swinging machetes and doing things like that.
right.
That just wasn't them.
Or as you
So,
had pointed out, even with the guys from the SEAL teams and stuff, a lot of times
mhm,
it's your military guys that all of a sudden there's some trigger point, be it a divorce or something else serious happening
mhm,
in their life, or I'm leaving with the kids and runs out the door, and then all of a sudden something really bad starts to happen, and yeah, law enforcement has to
right.
intervene.
Yeah, and then they think that they're POWs, or they thought, the first time I had someone go for my gun, he thought I was an insurgent and he thought he was in a different country. And you can
Yeah.
imagine, luckily everything worked out, but you can imagine how that escalated and how my night looked after that.
Oh, I'm sure. It,
Yeah.
it looks like it was maybe during the time while you were getting your degree, but you were an advocate at a suicide crisis hotline for a while. Is that
Yeah, I did that during undergrad. It
okay?
was just one
What
of
was
the
that
resources.
experience like?
It was mostly college students.
Okay.
So a lot of, depressed, anxious, whatever issues they had, leaving home, being in school, or things that happened at home that they couldn't get to,
Okay.
loss of family or whatever. So it was a really helpful and interesting opportunity
Yeah.
because I was 18, right? I mean, that was really my
Right.
first
You
exposure to
yourself
it.
was young.
Yeah, yeah, I was young and I had seen some issues, but I was raised military. So I had a lot of life exposure to different things.
Right. And I credit that a lot with the mental health side of this job and so forth. I think the more life experience you can have when you're dealing with
Hmm.
these really heavy subjects, at least in my opinion, I think it prepares you in some ways, not for everything, but it
Right.
prepares you in some ways.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It gives you a certain type of appreciation or resilience to be able to have the hard conversations, or I don't know, I'm just kind of speaking from the heart and making it up right now, but
Yeah.
I
I
think that's
agree with
kind
you.
of where it hits.
I think when you go through things, this is again opinion, and like you said, speaking from the
Yeah.
heart, but I think that when you go through different things in life, because life is always tough for everybody, we all have
Yeah.
those challenges. We all have some obviously at a higher level than others, but we all
Hmm.
have those things we have to deal with. And I think the more experience you have processing those on your own, again, not the one with the undergrad or not the one with the degree here, but I think the more time you have processing those on the own, the better suited you are for dealing with these
Hmm.
moments of crisis that come in law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, I think the experience drastically outweighs the degree.
Yeah.
It helped me in the fact that I could probably identify specific disorders faster. But even if you get a lot of exposure as CIT, it doesn't take long before you can say, well, what medication are you on? And you're like, okay, I know what you have. I know what you have. I
Right.
mean, they're common terminology now if you've worked enough of them.
Right.
So the experience, the undergrad is nice. The degree is nice. It's just a little piece of paper, an expensive piece of paper, I guess.
Very expensive piece of paper.
it's,
Yes.
it's, it's a very nice, expensive piece of paper. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
you apply it to the experience and really start to figure it out.
Yes. I did it the opposite. I ended up getting my criminal justice degree after coming into law enforcement instead of
Okay.
having it beforehand. So um, I don't know if there is a right or wrong there, but that was the way
Yeah.
I
I
did
don't
it,
know.
which was backwards, I guess. It looks like you spent some time also as an advocate for victims of sex trafficking, and that
Yeah.
intrigued me. What was that like?
Yeah. So was I still active? I was still active law enforcement. Um, and I had that exposure, just in patrol. There's a lot of it through
Right.
Virginia Beach. I mean, major thoroughways, right?
Yeah.
New York down to Virginia Beach, down to Florida to come hang out with you.
Yep.
So and I stumbled on a lot of things. I was that patrol officer where halfway through my week, my sergeant would be like, "Can you go have coffee and just
Yes.
sit for a little bit? I'm done writing things for you. I just need you to be quiet and go sit over there."
Yeah. And then that's when that
And
coffee shop's going to get
and
robbed.
and
Yeah.
exactly, right? I mean, there was no hiding
Yeah.
for me. It's just not how it works.
I
I
have a
thought it was
guy that
great,
works for me
but
that's exactly like that. So don't worry about it.
yeah, yeah, it was everyone was fine. We were safe, but
Yeah.
my supervisors were always very busy. So,
That's a good thing.
anyway, that's right. I was just productive. That's all.
That's right.
But that being said, I completely just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Talking about the victims
And
of sex
yeah, the
trafficking.
victim. So I would stumble upon it and saw the law enforcement side. Then when I got pulled into the nonprofit, they did a lot of the transition safe housing.
Right.
So
Okay.
after they, got the girls, then it was okay. Here's the, secure housing, very like witness protection style kind of situation, high security. And then they would do classes for them, how to write a resume, how to, dress to get a job, how to do laundry, the basic life skills that they didn't have an opportunity to learn,
Right.
especially some of them. I mean, they had been trafficking for 10 years. They were little girls when they were taken, and now they were young adults. So we did a lot of that work, and it was really great because I got to have those deep, intimate conversations with them while building that community trust of law enforcement because they
Yeah.
were terrified of cops.
Right.
Right? They were
Oftentimes, yeah.
terrified. Yeah, oftentimes they were terrified. They didn't understand. Obviously I didn't come in uniform.
Right.
I did a lot of the women's self-defense for them. So, we'd hang out in workout clothes and we would do those things. I would teach them those really valuable skills and build their confidence and everything else. So that was a very cool, fortunate opportunity, that I got to be pulled in, professionally and personally being involved in it.
That's awesome. Yeah, when I saw
Yeah.
that and some of the other things that you've been doing, I love, at least in my opinion, from the outside looking in, I really thought, those are great experiences to be a part of.
Hmm.
That kind of segues into what you're doing because it really shows and teaches you and exposes you to the human side and the
Yeah.
human element that a lot of people don't get the exposure to.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely takes away any of that safety bubble or tunnel vision or
Yes.
any other lens that you could be looking through.
Oh, that's great. So mental health and law enforcement,
Hmm.
kind of a large, broad term, large
Yes.
heading, if you would, but that seems to also be a subset of a lot of kind of the direction that you've gone. Is that correct? As
Hmm.
far as what's brought you back to the law enforcement profession?
Yeah, so it wasn't the first thing that brought me back. It was actually toxic leadership and culture that brought me back. Um,
Well, let's start
I,
there.
yeah, sure. So I worked for two agencies. I only talk about Virginia Beach because that was the positive one. So I give them credit there. Um, when we got orders, we moved to North Carolina, of course, and I went to the agency that was hiring.
Right.
What else can you do? Marine Corps said jump, and away we went.
That's the way that works. Yes.
Right. So we moved, and it's not an agency I would have chosen anyway. Just personally, going from 900 down to an agency of 20.
Yeah.
Demographics, the city dynamics, it wasn't something that interested me anyway.
Okay.
But that's who I worked for. I said, the job's a job. What else can you do? And then that's when I had more experiences, really learning that all of the, I guess in my mind at the time, rumors of police corruption and toxic leadership, things I hadn't been exposed to in
Right.
Virginia Beach. Not saying Virginia Beach was perfect. I mean, there were some, probably some subpar supervisors out of the group, but
That's
what can you
everywhere.
do? Everywhere, exactly. But I went to this agency, and unfortunately, it was like all the bad things you've ever heard about law enforcement wrapped into one place.
Wow.
It was so toxic that, I mean, it pushed me out of law enforcement. I planned on, a 20-year whatever career, and I loved my job in Virginia Beach, right? Like, couldn't wait to get back on the street the next day. I mean, I'm never leaving. I mean, I was the cop's cop, really loved what I was doing.
Right.
And when I went to this other agency, after 2 years, I tolerated it for 2 more years. Um, I had criminal charges on everybody in my command.
Wow.
I didn't file any of them because I basically didn't want the attention. I didn't want the
Right.
media. So looking back, maybe I didn't make the best decision because hopefully no one has, gone through what I went through now. But I didn't take any charges out, and all the corruption sat in one place. And it was so toxic that I had that really that kick in the head from my husband, who Marine, so no feelings, no filters,
Exactly.
right? He said, you're just not fun to be married to anymore.
Wow.
Like, ugh.
Yeah. It's
you
like,
know,
okay,
here,
I understand.
right, I get it. Here I thought I was separating it. I'm not bringing work home, so proof that we've all lived that lie one day or another,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
We carry that stress with us back and forth. And that's when I left law enforcement.
Wow.
I left and I said, my marriage is more important. We now have started a family. My kids are more important. So I need to leave because I don't think I can fix what's going on there. That really gave me that jump start of, okay, if this happened to me, it's definitely happening everywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
There's a lot of toxic leadership. There's a lot of corruption. There are a lot of other problems, while still the minority of law enforcement, highly impactful.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Who are affecting the people who really want to be good at their jobs, right? Who really do want to serve their communities in a positive way. So that's what got me back into training law enforcement of how do I fix the culture issue.
Okay.
And then I developed the mental health side.
Very good. Well, and well, first of all, let me back up. There is a lot to that, and that's awesome. I say a lot on here because I interview and talk with people from all over the country, and oftentimes
Mhm.
either in law enforcement or somehow related to law enforcement. And I'll hear these stories. I'll hear these horror stories of things that they've gone through at these different agencies. And a lot of times they're smaller agencies that you hear the biggest issues with.
Yeah.
And that has not been my experience. It's kind of like your description of Virginia Beach. Not perfect because nobody is, but I'm very fortunate to be in a very good agency with a lot of really good people, strong
Mhm.
leadership, and very forward thinking. So I don't have these negative experiences sometimes when I'm talking with
Right.
these people to fully understand. I mean, I'm old enough to understand that, people do bad things, and I'm sure these things are happening, but it's interesting seeing that dichotomy of going from one agency and then seeing it on the other one. It's funny when you mentioned mental health, that's kind of one of the questions I was going to ask you is, do you think a lot of the mental health issues are solely from factors outside of agencies, or is it a lot of time factors that are created from inside of agencies, which kind of, I think, piggybacks on what you were just saying?
I would say it's predominantly inside the agency and side effects of the job. Now, not to say you can't have some, you know, purely personal trauma, something that, you have going on and you happen to be in law enforcement. Obviously, those things can happen.
Right.
And for the sake of conversation, let's pretend we're not talking about veterans who have now gone into law enforcement.
Right.
I mean, because they bring that baggage too.
Right.
So let's just pretend that's not part of what we're discussing.
Yes,
Because that's a different set of rules there.
absolutely.
But it's, mental health challenges in the profession, they are inevitable, right? The job is responding to trauma.
Yeah.
Like no one really says it out loud, but no one gets a promotion and calls 911. I mean, right? It's just the way it is. People
Right.
only call when everything is the worst it's ever been.
Yeah. They're having their absolute
And
worst day.
absolute worst day. And, I think and I'm sure you've seen it too, or you at least appreciate it. That's why we know cops become distrusting and cynical because they only see the very worst days.
Yeah.
It's not the majority of days, but that's all you get called to. And so, of course, it does, being humans, right? It builds up over time. But where we have, and this is strong, but I'm going to say it anyway, where we have failed in the profession is not being proactive with the inevitable challenges, but only being responsive to it. Hey, we know that police suicide is higher than line of duty deaths. It
Right.
has been. Like, we know that. Well, we don't need to talk about after the fact because we missed what we should have been doing, 5 years ago.
Right.
For that person.
Yeah.
We can't wait until they are at rock bottom and try and step in and say, oh, well, this is, you should think positively now. This is what we should do. It should have been ingrained in the culture during, the academy or during, FTO phases or whatever in the very beginning. And
Yeah.
that's where we're missing the mark in the profession.
Do you think, in your experience and in what you guys are starting to do with talking to people, do you think administrators are seeing this, or is it still a little bit of that old school mentality of we don't have a problem, and if I say we have a problem, then there's a stigma and so forth attached to that?
I think it is shifting. I do think it's still a little bit of the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Which is why I kind of open my trainings that way. I'm like, we're gonna get very real right here. What kills cops? And then they're real quick. Oh, we know it's ourselves. Whether that be suicide or high blood pressure, heart attacks,
Right.
all the other things,
All
right?
the lifestyle choices that come
all
with
the
it.
lifestyle choices, the years of elevated heart rate during shift, all those things. So physical and psychological, but law enforcement as a whole, even though we know there's proactive policing, the job is reactive.
Right.
I mean, for the most part, right? That's why we're usually at a disadvantage. I mean, and you get called, and even that strikes a negative chord sometimes. Is, oh, we have proactive policing. We do, but your primary job is to, at least patrol, is to respond to calls for service.
Correct.
That's reactive.
It is by its very definition reactive.
Right, by its definition, and that's fine. That's the purpose. That's what you're supposed to do. I'm not trying to change what the job
Right.
is. But we can't control that. What we can control is our own mental health and our own agencies and what we're doing to, again, say, hey, we know that you will have strained relationships. We know that. We know that you will have trauma in your career. We know that you're going to have, emotional baggage and everything that is tied to trauma. And we have no idea how or when it's going to happen.
Right.
Right? You can be on 20 years or you can be on 20 minutes.
Yeah. I think
right?
that's very true.
So why do we wait? So I start having these conversations and everyone agrees, but I find I have to start the conversation. Very rare does someone start the conversation with me about what can we do about the mental health of our guys. That conversation doesn't take place.
When they ask that question, how do you answer that question?
We train it like everything else.
Starting at the academy level, or is it just more at the agency? Because I guess it depends. So let me back up to that question. So like in the state of Florida, our academies are usually tied with the community colleges, which is now a state college. So you're not necessarily, you could be sponsored by an agency, but a lot of times they're not even hired by an agency yet. They, like in my situation, I went through the academy on my own and then got picked up by an agency after applying to several across the state. So depending on where you're from, it can be different, because I know I was looking at some other states, just curious of how they did it, and they're different. The agencies actually hire first. So that being said, is your focus more on that academy level, or is it kind of a combination of both, or what is your focus?
We have not taught at the academy level yet.
Okay.
Now, when I started training law enforcement, I actually trained at the top first. I went straight to command staff and then trained at chief and sheriff conferences.
Good.
So I went to the top first, then started saying, hey, we need, your first line supervisors. And now, hey, your guys who don't have formal rank need leadership training. They need career development training. And we started shifting that mindset of, no, you don't get that until you're a lieutenant. You don't. I said, I'm not talking about Northwestern or, FBINA. Like, that's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
But you can't have an officer who has no formal rank on Friday. You give them a gold badge on Monday, and now they magically know how to lead people.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. Same as the military, it doesn't work, but yet we continue to do it, unfortunately. And I wonder why we have issues. So it's started to trickle down in this, everyone in the agency needs it, based on that idea of trauma is going to happen. The job is hard. The nature of the profession is hard and is not for everybody, but we don't know if that means 20 minutes or 20 years.
I think that's well said. I really like that. And I think that that's, so one thing that we're doing, in fact, Saturday I speak at it. So I'm also an instructor at a local academy here. And our director came to a group of us. She knew that I was doing this and some other people that are doing some other things on the side as well. And it's called ART, because just like the military, everything has to be an acronym, right? So,
Absolutely.
so it's called ART, which is Academy Resiliency Training. And
Okay.
it's this idea of exactly what you're saying. We take pretty much the 8 areas of wellness, and then
Hmm.
we have different instruction on each of them, working with the cadets within week 1 of starting the academy. And
Yep.
then hopefully move into, this is the first one we're formally launching it during, and then move into some tabletop exercises in about the middle of their academy, and then towards the end bring them back in right before they get launched out to probably going to an agency somewhere,
Hmm.
and just kind of solidify the things that we taught them on the front end. One of the things we're going to do is bring a lot of their support system. So because of COVID, it's only going to be 2 people for this first one,
Right.
but 2 people that's within their support system. How important is the support system when we talk about mental health and we talk about these kind of things? Because as you pointed out, and as you mentioned, there's going to be strained relationships. There's going to be some issues like
Hmm.
that. How important is getting that extended family and stuff on board early on?
I mean, it's everything, but I would say more importantly than support from family is knowing who the best people to support you are.
Okay.
Like, I mean, I'll go into it. We actually do a whole segment on circle of influence. And, I actually make my students, and they appreciate it later, but they don't really love me in the moment, but it's a tough
Right.
love kind of situation.
All the best teachers are that
Um,
way. Go.
right. Yeah. I mean, we're a very tough love
Yeah.
organization over here.
I love it.
All my trainers are the same way. And it's, hey, list out the 5 people or however many, but let's say 5 are part of your inner circle. And it's, my spouse, my best friend, my, friend from 15 years, maybe a coworker. That's usually who goes into that circle.
Right.
And it's okay. Are they positive or negative influences? They say, well, what do you mean? And I said, this isn't about love, right? It's not about that, because we all love our family, whether we like them or not,
Right.
right?
Those
I
are,
mean,
those can be mutually exclusive.
right? They can. I mean, and my family is amazing. I love my family, and I mostly like them,
Right.
mostly, right? But they also aren't in my circle of influence because they have no idea what I'm doing.
Right.
So their influence doesn't really carry any weight on my decision making. So we talk about that. Hey, you can love your spouse, you can love your brother, you can love your best friend, but after you have conversations with them, do they make you feel better or worse? And do they make you perform at a higher or lower level?
That's great.
And then they start going through. And sometimes it's great. And sometimes it's like, crap, there's my best friend of 15 years who actually doesn't help me at all.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
he's fun to drink with, like we laugh, but he's actually not helpful.
Exactly. They go through
You
that
know?
list and they're like, none of these 5 are really working out so well.
Right, right. And we do, like, we actually do, I call it a circle rehab, and we revisit that circle when we build a new one. And that's, pretty in-depth training, because it's hard, right?
It
There's
is.
definitely some personal and emotional challenges there. But going back to what you said, is it just the family? It's who is going to not just be a cheerleader, but really listen to what I need. And really, when it is hard, not, it's okay, honey, you can do something else. But yeah, it's hard. It's good for you. Is this still what you want? Then you need to push forward,
Right.
and keep them on the track that is best for them, not best for what the family wants them to do.
That's awesome. No, I think that's great. I don't remember who said it, but there's that quote out there that I've said many, many times, that you are the sum total of the 5 people you spend the most time
Hmm.
around. And that's
Hmm.
exactly the principle of what you're saying. It really, if you're around negativity all the time, you're going to, by default, probably be a negative person, or at
Yeah,
some point it's going to affect you negatively.
right. And you may not even notice. That's the
Right.
hard part.
You're
Because if you're
absolutely
around them all the time, right? You don't notice, and it's okay for it to change. I mean,
right.
I changed my circle. I wouldn't say always, but as I left law enforcement, and my husband and I both became full-time civilians for the first time, and we started being entrepreneurs. We did another circle. I had some falling out in the business world. I recreated again,
Yep.
and I mean, it's just part of growth.
Yeah.
And
There's
if you're
always that
growing,
growth.
then yeah, then your circle should change.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's really good. What role, and this is probably a rhetorical question, but 2020 is kind of falling apart. What role, just in case you haven't noticed, I just thought I'd
It's
throw
been
that
an
out there.
adventure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Quite
Um,
the adventure this year.
what role do you think that is having now and is going to have on officers' mental health going forward? Because I mean, it's a mess. We'll just leave it at that, but I'd be
Yeah.
curious your thoughts on it.
It is, unfortunately, it's worse than I anticipated.
Okay.
Now, I think I'm probably not alone in, when we did, and I know it's different every state, but when everyone went on their lockdown in March, it was all the way back to normal by May,
Right.
right? By
Well,
4th of July,
15 days, yeah,
by,
to flatten the curve.
right, right. And it's just still going.
Yeah.
And this was just COVID, right? This is like pre-George Floyd.
Right.
Okay, and now we have the accumulation of that's going on, right? And as soon as it slows down, something else happens. I know I'm not watching my own news channel over here. So, and I live outside Atlanta.
Okay.
So we're part of a lot of those big messes.
Right. You've had your
some
moments
of
in the news.
we've
Yes.
we've had our moments in the news. That's right, like every proud city.
Yes.
Um, and we're the first state to open back up, and all of those things.
Right.
But the number of officers who have chosen early retirement, I don't think agencies were ready for that.
Yeah.
I think they anticipated slow recruitment, which that's kind of been a lull for a number of years anyway. I think they anticipated, some morale issues, understandably so, right? Maybe some productivity, some retention, some small retention issues, but I don't think they anticipated some of these agencies have seen mass exodus of early retirement.
Yeah.
Or Atlanta kicked off the first successful blue flu.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, they
so
did.
yep, way to go, Atlanta. There have been a lot of things, a lot of adventures here as well.
You got to be known for something, right?
You know what? That's right. I mean, pros, cons, doesn't matter. You make the news.
Yes.
Someone else will make the news tomorrow and they'll forget anyway.
Yeah.
So I do think it's worse than anticipated. And the hard thing that we have going right now is there's no training time and there's no budget. So law enforcement needs even more help, and now they can't get it.
Right.
And that's kind of the rock and hard place we're rolling with for 2020.
Gotcha. Well, and not to get too political with it, but that's the issue with this whole one of many issues with this defund the police idea is because all the resources that we're discussing, which is exactly what helps in a lot of situations, are the first things that are going to get cut.
Yeah. And that's a huge, even with just our training, because not yet, it is coming, but we don't do a lot of the diversity inclusion. We don't do the anti-bias. My partner is a DT expert. I mean, that's what he does in his business, but that's not the primary focus of our training programs.
Right.
Ours is all the non-in-service stuff that you need to be successful in the career and be successful in your personal life. The things that aren't mandatory, post-certified, by the book kind of stuff, which means it's looked at last, but it's some of the most critical training. Because one of my recent students, he said it so well. He said, we fall into this complacency, this habit of, and he's been a patrolman in Boston for 18 years. Wow. He goes, this habit of, how can I clear this call? How can I clear and go on to the next thing versus how can I help this person who called 911?
Yeah.
And he was like, and I don't know when it takes place and when that shift happens. He goes, I feel like I failed because I didn't notice the shift. He's like, until I was in this class. But that's where we're failing. He's like, and that's where we need to have some of this mindset shift and slow down and look at, okay, how do we actually serve and help our communities? Because that's why everyone got into it in the first place.
You're right.
But we forget. Right? We forget with all the noise.
I think without intentionality or even that being cognizant of it, because I've even seen the shift within myself now, because
Hmm.
probably of what I'm doing here on the side, I'm a little bit more aware of seeing things in myself because I'm constantly having these type conversations. But you're absolutely right. We all kind of have that shift over time where originally it was a mission mindset or I want to help these
Hmm.
people. I want to solve this problem to really, I've got to deal with this person again. You know, there's this shift that
Yeah.
happens and the cynicism that comes in, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first time I actually raised my voice at an arrest. It took me like 4 years.
Yeah.
Well, then I did. I finally, whatever the situation was, it was, assaults and bar fights and, nonsense, right? Nonsense, but everyone was going to jail. We were all running out of handcuffs kind of situation.
Right.
And we still weren't getting it. And I did. I lost it. Now, not with excessive force or anything that
Right.
brought major turmoil. But it was finally that, get your ass in the car. This is what we're doing, to the point where everyone stopped. I was like, what? Like Carrie just yelled
Carrie just yelled at this
and
guy.
they just yelled, right? I was like, I'm done. This is it.
Yeah.
This has been a 2-hour evolution here. But I don't think that ever would have happened in the years prior.
Right.
Just for me personally, I think I would have had more patience. I would have found another way. I would have used some more strategic communication, all those skills that we have,
Yep.
instead of being, I'm done. It's time for you to now do what you need to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. In fact, the gentleman I was just speaking with in the previous podcast, that's exactly what we were just talking about. Because I came into this
Hmm.
career with a lot of customer service experience from
Okay.
running my own business, working in
Hmm.
retail, and so forth. And I was older; I was in my 30s when I started, so I had years and years of customer service experience. So when I first started, it's exactly what you were describing. It was always more of a customer service. We can talk about
Yeah.
this. We can work it out mindset. And then, yeah, there comes a time where that patience begins to wear off a little bit.
Yeah. A little
And
bit faster.
yes, it's like, we're not dealing with this enough. No, that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about what exactly you are doing then. So is Team Triad part of Mindset Enterprise, or let us know a little bit
Yes.
about exactly which is which and what you're doing?
Yeah. So Mindset Enterprise is my company that I started, solopreneur, a handful of years ago. And it doesn't just cover first responders, because I have some corporate executive clients and trainings and things like that. Because I do organizational development, recruiting, retention, employee engagement, all of those things, which is just about people, right? It
Right.
applies the same whether you're talking to a group of sales managers or a bunch of police sergeants, right?
True.
The examples are different, but the concepts are the same,
You're right.
because people are still people. So Mindset Enterprise does cover that piece. I also now do some work with Department of Education. So I have more going on. Triad Leadership and Development was just launched in January, with my partner Jared Hardy. He's retired PD out of Denver, Colorado, and has his own businesses, and he's the DT expert and all of those things. We came together with this vision of, we need to give law enforcement all of the pieces that they need that we never received as sworn law enforcement.
Right.
The things that we wish we had in our career, the things that outside looking in, and as business owners and those in the personal development space, and the things that we've done, we need to create a program for them. So Triad Leadership and Development focuses on service purpose mindset, and the whole point is to challenge the status quo and be proactive with your mental health and do this personal development foundation, so you can actually be a high performing and authentic leader in the law enforcement space.
Yeah.
But we like strip them down, bare bones. We're going to talk about you, really the person behind the badge, which is always hard at first.
I was going to ask about that because I know how
Yeah.
law enforcement is, and I
Yep.
know how we are in the trainings. You get the eye rolls,
Uh-huh.
you get the, yeah, just whatever I got to do to get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? How is that process as far as breaking into, especially when you get some of your older
Mm-hmm.
deputies and so forth that have been on the job a while?
The fact that Jared and I are both prior law enforcement helps a lot.
I'm sure. I have no doubt.
And yeah, it helps a lot. They are and I've been told, I'm relieved that you're not a psychologist. They find out, like, because I do a lot of psychology and neuroscience, and like my nerd side comes out,
Right.
but that's because from a training standpoint, I have to bring objectivity and science in. So I don't think this is just a warm and fuzzy, personal development course.
Right.
Because I'm not a warm and fuzzy. I mean, I was raised military with all brothers. I became a cop. I married a Marine, and then I had boys.
So you're
Now
saying you're not exactly Tony Robbins, like you just
not
opened
it.
up there?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay.
it's not my thing. So I know that. Like I know I'm not a warm and fuzzy, so I can at least appreciate where they're coming from, being on the receiving end. But what Jared and I really focus on that is so different from training that we even received is that we don't hide behind our own experiences. We are very transparent. So when I talk about training your brain and gratitude practice, and we go into the science of, manipulating dopamine and all these different
Right.
things, I talk about my depression and when I was suicidal and my husband's combat trauma, where he had, 20 years Marine Corps, all combat tours, where he has those blackout episodes,
Right.
where we've had the dangerous, very few, but we've had the dangerous situations in our house where he didn't know who I was. There are firearms in this military law enforcement household.
Always.
Right. So we had all those situations. So I get to talk about all of that and say, hey, here's the science, here's why it works. And now I'm going to tell you, I used it and my husband used it, and we're both still standing. And our nightmares are gone, and his night sweats are gone, and he hasn't had an episode. And, here's the proof. And this is why I want you guys to use it.
It's awesome.
Because we did it.
Yeah.
So I think that once they get that piece, it's okay. Like,
Yep.
maybe we'll implement this.
It gets past that skepticism. Yeah, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
Even doing this, because obviously a lot of law enforcement, I'm finding a lot of non-law enforcement listen as well, but a lot of law enforcement listen to the show. And that was one of the things early on. They were like, well, I can listen to you because of the time that you spend in, still are in law enforcement, where clearly they would just turn it off if you weren't, because nobody wants to hear from somebody who's not been there and
has never done it. Yeah.
Especially in the law enforcement career, because what we do is so unique, and so it really is completely different than almost any other career. It's very similar to the military, but even in and of its own right, it's very different. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have those conversations, in my house. I'm sure some psychologists would say our conversations are very unhealthy and whatever, the kinds of terrible conversations we've had. But they're coping for us.
Right.
The fact that we can compare trauma stories, and for us, it's helpful.
Yeah.
But so there are parallels, there are understandings. But when you're military, you go somewhere, right? You deploy and you go do something. When you're not deployed, you're training or you're sitting at a desk.
Right.
Not to minimize what the military does by any means, but when you're law enforcement, you're in it every single day, and it's the guy down the street.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the stranger from some other country that is a threat. It's the traffic stop.
Yep. And there's a lot of things there people don't even think about, like what you're talking about, because you do come home every night, usually from your tour. So when it's, when it's 5, 6 a.m. and you're home every day at 5, 6 a.m., but that night you were in some sort of shooting. So you're sending a text that, hey, if you see the news, don't freak out. I'm okay. Well, they freak out and they figure you're not okay. And, you show up 4 hours later, and there's a whole nother factor there that comes because you are a civilian as well. You're here in the United States and you're home every night.
Right. Exactly right. That's why we had the rule in our house of no news on when I'm at work.
Yes. Yeah. Just don't watch it, and you don't want to see anything.
No news allowed. And fortunately, I only got in trouble once for my phone dying, and I was like 8 hours late from a shift. And yeah, I was only scolded once.
Yeah, I'm sure that didn't go over too well.
No, it wasn't good.
Let me just, and I know they're very in depth, but I love these terms that you guys use for Team Triad, the service purpose mindset. Can you just give us a brief little taste of what those mean to you and what they mean in this program?
Absolutely. So it's the true leader and the service first, right? Now, service first, that of course in the profession can mean to your community. I mean, that's easily understood and used in law enforcement. but also, service to your family, service to yourself. How do you take care of yourself, which is a huge challenge for those who are natural servant hearts,
Yeah.
right? I don't need to worry about me. I'm here for everyone else. Well, you can't pour into others with an empty cup,
Well said.
right? So it's going back to, what do you need? You need to take care of yourself if you want to have any chance of actually fulfilling the duties that you say you're going to fulfill and do them effectively. Purpose, the big personal piece there is, and it's, I did it as well, and I know it's a huge issue in law enforcement, is that you fully identify yourself as a cop. If someone says, tell me about yourself, you say, well, I'm a cop. One accountant doesn't say that.
Right.
You don't say, tell me about yourself. Oh, I love to, play basketball and go on the boat. They don't say, I'm an accountant.
Right. I like to count numbers. Yeah. I love spreadsheets.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's not what happens, but law enforcement does it.
Yeah.
Right. Tell me about yourself. Oh, I'm a cop here. This is what I do. And then the conversation either, goes up here, tell me about your job, or they don't know what to talk to you about.
Or it's
right?
the opposite. Now that you mentioned that, or it's the opposite and they don't say anything. Like I'll usually give
Right.
that, I just work for the county kind of.
I work for, exactly. Yeah. I work for the city.
Yeah.
Yep. I work for the city. I work for the county. Right. And you don't tell them at all.
Yeah.
I'm a landscaper, right? You
Exactly.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I still put plants on the ground green side up. That's what I do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We used to do that too. So it's going into that purpose of, it's a very real possibility that you have the job today and tomorrow you won't have the job. Either one, you'll get hurt, right? And you'll be medically retired and your life will change, or like right now, all these guys who are taking early retirement.
Yeah.
Well, they're choosing early retirement, but how many of them know what to do next?
Right.
Now you have these 15 years, whatever, all these mental health issues that now come forward in well, what do I do? Now I have an identity crisis. Now I don't really know what my purpose is. I was trained, I was very mission oriented. Now what?
Right.
So now you have a crisis situation. And then the mindset, which is not, I like to make this very clear, mindset is not positive and negative thoughts.
Okay.
If that were true, right? Because think about it. If you are depressed, and they say, well, just think positive thoughts. Well, that would be great if that worked.
Right. Yes.
Right. I mean, that would be great. That would be really easy. And we probably wouldn't have a lot of mental health issues that we have.
Right.
Because that would be an easy fix. Mindset is how you handle success and failure.
Okay.
So how do you acknowledge and ignite your successes? How do you leverage your failures? Again, two things that are inevitable, personally and professionally. We've all had both.
Right.
Right. So what do you do with them? So those are the pillars that we work in. So we really take those deep dives of, when you wake up tomorrow, if you don't have the job, what are you passionate about? What's going to get you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah.
Right. And you can't, I even go one step further and I say, it can't be your kids, because eventually your kids are going to move out.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So now your kids go away.
Mine just turned 18 and just graduated high school. So
right,
the day's
right.
coming sooner rather than later, I'm sure.
Exactly. So you need something else for you.
Right.
Right. That doesn't hang on everybody else. So it's a lot of self-reflection. It's a lot of introspective work. It's a lot of uncomfortable work.
Right. But so needed, and
so needed. Yeah.
Such powerful stuff. That's what I love about it. In fact, just a little side note, when I was watching some of the videos and so forth, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but I really enjoyed, one of the guys was talking and he said that on the mindset side, it was referring to leadership, how he learned to be a leader in the position he was in, even though he wasn't in a position of leadership per se. He wasn't a sergeant, but he learned that leadership mindset, which is what you were saying earlier about being ready when that opportunity arises. And my goodness, is that so needed these days.
Exactly. Yeah. And I actually know exactly who you're talking about, because I speak to him pretty often. And yeah, even now he's having challenges. So he reaches out to me and he has challenges with whatever's going on at work, with his supervisors, because like you said, he doesn't have formal rank. He says, but I've been here for 10 years. I need to be that leader for the guy next to me that's been here for 2, and for this guy over here. And he's like, and if I want to become, want to get promoted, I at least need to build myself now. So I don't do what my supervisor is doing.
Yeah. I think that's
So
great.
we have to learn that early.
Yeah, and as a frontline supervisor, I'll say, so many of my guys and gals when I have them, but right now they're all guys.
Mhm.
They're all young, and I know that I
Yeah.
was young once too. But my goodness, are they young? And it's exactly what you're saying. It's that getting that mindset early on, teaching them that responsibility and that ability to. You're going to be a leader someday, and here's the strengths and weaknesses and the areas struggles that I have,
Hmm.
and here's the pitfalls to avoid, and what can we do to bring you up so that when the opportunity arises, when you take that sergeant's exam, whatever the case may be, that you're going to be ready to lead people.
Exactly, because it's so much more than the exam,
It is.
right? And the exams are just a tool,
Well, and
right?
so
The
often the
assessments.
exams are really focused on book knowledge. So you
Exactly.
get a lot of people that are good test takers, good at regurgitating information.
Hmm.
Even some of the hands-on type tests were all really geared around your ability to memorize general orders.
Right.
So as long as you have the SOPs
Right.
down, then you can pretty much just apply it to
Right.
whatever the scenario is.
Exactly. Right.
And that,
Instead of the authentic and the effective leader who needs to know their people and know the questions to ask and how to, foster that culture of everyone having ownership, right?
yeah,
And everyone being positive, being a positive influence on the guy next to him. And, that's where you see culture shift.
yep.
That's where you start. It's just a long process.
I love it. And I tell you, Carrie, in some ways, I think we just got started with a lot of really good stuff. But let me ask you a final question that I kind of ask everybody.
Yeah.
Um, we've touched on so many ideas and so many different things, but if you were going to boil it down to one thing that is actionable, that would make a difference in law enforcement officers' lives, what would that be?
The very first thing I have all of my students do, and this is the warm and fuzzy part, it
It's
is,
okay.
but there's a reason for it, is if not already, start a gratitude journal.
Really?
Do a gratitude journal every single morning or night, whenever your day starts, right? And I have them list 10. And we can talk about another time, what it actually does to your brain and things like that. But as you create this habit of writing 10 things that you're grateful for, it will shift you, actually change the chemicals in your brain to see the positive side of situations when you are at work.
Wow.
It takes a little bit of time, like any muscle, but write down those things that you are grateful for. And it's a perspective check,
Yeah.
right? When things are bad, it's okay. Things are really bad right now, but going home to my significant other, but no matter what, I still have food on my table, right? I still have a roof over my head. I mean, those things that we don't always acknowledge and
Right.
we do take for granted,
We do.
right? The supervisor that's driving us crazy. Hey, I'm employed and I have a supervisor right now. It's COVID. Not everyone can say that.
That's right. Yeah, not
I
everybody is
mean,
quote unquote essential, and some are really
exactly.
struggling right now.
That's right. So you lucky essential workers.
Yes,
As painful as it may be, we do have a lot of these things that we just don't take notice of. So that's the first one, is gratitude practice.
I love that. Any parameters, rules, or anything associated with that? Because I know you mentioned some work things and home things. Do you tell them to kind of
Hmm.
do a blend of both, or?
Yeah, I say a blend of both because you should have positives in both, right? You
Oh yeah,
probably also have challenges in both.
always.
Usually one, falls into, stems the other,
Yes,
right?
very
Yeah,
true.
the argument at home now makes you a little grumpy at work and vice versa,
Right, and then that
right?
what is inevitably a bad night at work then makes you grumpy at home when you get back in the cycle. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So as much as we all say it's separate, let's just be honest with ourselves for a second.
yeah.
And if you don't see it, gentlemen, anyway, your wife definitely sees it.
Yes,
Without a doubt, you're not hiding. She sees it as soon as you walk in the door. So no parameters. It just has to be genuine. Don't say, my dog, my kid, my house, my, whatever. You should actually have an emotional response where by the time you're getting to the end of that list, you might even be smiling because you are feeling really good about all the things going on in your life right now.
I think that's great advice. That is something that is so needed. And I love so much of what you do has to do with mindset and just perspective change. And
Yeah.
what a powerful tool that can really help anybody, whether they're in law enforcement or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Life skills.
Yes, exactly. Well, Carrie, this has been a wonderful conversation. How can people connect with you?
Absolutely. So my website is mindsetenterprise.net. You can shoot me a message or an email straight through there. Otherwise, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the things. Carrie Wooten and Real Carrie Wooten on Facebook and Instagram.
Perfect. I'll be sure to link all that up in the show notes so people can find it. And I
Awesome.
love what you guys are doing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.